Today, we'll show you Business Europe's Reform Barometer 2018, 10 years after the economic crisis. In this Reform Barometer, you'll see how the European Union has performed relative to its global counterparts during this period. You'll see if and how recommendations for structural reforms in Europe were really brought forward. The data for this barometer is based on a survey of Business Europe's 39 member federations from all over Europe. We've analyzed the competitive positions of the EU in the global economy. 2017 has clearly been a strong year for the EU economy with growth of 2.5%. But it hasn't been so for most of the past 10 years. The EU's recovery took place at a very slow pace compared to that of other major economies in the world. The US economy, for example, is now 15% bigger than in 2007, and Canada's economy is 18% bigger, whereas the EU has grown by only 9% from 2007 to 2017. On top of that, the stronger recent recovery in the EU is helped by a number of temporary factors, in particular the support of the European Central Bank. However, the underlying capacity for long-term growth is estimated at only 1.3% in the EU, and thus well below the current cyclical growth. We thus find it important that policymakers actually use the present period of strong growth to put in place the right reforms that support our future growth potential. Coming to labor markets, we have seen the creation of more than 11 million jobs in Europe since the peak of the euro crisis in 2013. While unemployment still remains high in several member states, businesses increasingly report difficulties in hiring qualified workers. The share of industrial companies which indicate that insufficient labor limits their production is now at twice the pre-crisis level and the highest on record since 1985. This points to an increasing mismatch in EU labor markets, which results from a surplus of job vacancies and a shortage of qualified workers to fill them. And we are very concerned that this will slow future falls in unemployment. To improve the situation, we believe that we need to better tailor education and training systems to labor market needs. In particular, we find that more graduates in the field of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics are needed, as well as people with digital skills to address the increasing mismatches. We also believe that such reforms should go along with a reduction of the tax wedge on labor. The average tax wedge in Europe is 42%. This is almost 1/3 higher than in Japan and the United States, which are both only at 32%. In this area, we have barely seen any structural changes over the past 10 years. Another area for the EU to improve and to remain competitive is spending on research and development. But today, such R&D spending remains much lower than in Japan and the United States. And China strongly increased its R&D spending over the last decade and recently overtook the European Union. To give you a concrete figure, we will need to invest an additional 150 billion euros a year in order to reach the EU's own 2020 target of spending, which is 3% of gross domestic product on R&D. Overall, we can conclude that 10 years after the crisis, it remains much more difficult to do business in the European Union than in the United States. This is also shown by the Doing Business reports of the World Bank. So, there are many areas to improve the EU's business environment. We believe one key task is, for example, to work towards completion of the EU single market, in particular regarding the digital economy, telecoms, energy and services. Given these outstanding issues, it is disappointing to see that our members tell us since years that reform implementation in their countries is very low. This time, only 22% of European Commission's recommendations for structural reforms are regarded as properly implemented in the EU member states. This is despite that most of our members believe the recommendations focus on the right areas for reform. But we see a slight improvement. because last year implementation of these recommendations was even lower, at just 17%. For more information and our complete 2018 Reform Barometer, please visit our Business Europe website.